I will do a very brief overview on livestock and fodder resources in Sardinian pastoral areas. I will say something about Sardinia because probably many of you haven't visited Sardinia before. So it's an island. It's in the middle of the Mediterranean basin, and it's typical the heavy pressure of grazing animals all over the island, all over the territories, and particularly the pressure of dairy sheep, because we have 3 million of dairy sheep in a surface of 24,000 square kilometers. So you can imagine how important is the presence of those grazing animals for shaping the landscape. This is an example of Sardinian inland with a combination of patches, all or quite all grazed, because dairy sheep especially, used to stay open air all over the year. And so they shape the landscape building on open areas like pastures, open pastures, but also contributing to manage the woodlands and the shrublands. And so at the end, the result is a negro-silver pastoral landscape that is very typical of the inland in Sardinia. But in the last century, something happened that has a consequence in the vegetation patterns of the island, and we will see something about this. So from an archaic pastoralism to a modern pastoralism. Specifically, what's happening is that in ancient times, I mean 100 years ago, the productive cycle of the dairy sheep was synchronized with the pastoral availability. It means that during the lactations, the ewes find the right amount of biomass coming from the natural pastures. And so during autumn and winter, no lactations, no lambings, and so the energy requirements are so scarce, so low, and the pastoral availability is at the same time so low. So there is a perfect combination of pastoral, there was a perfect combination between pastoral availability and energy requirements of the animals. But something happened at the end of the 19th century. The import of the Pecorino Romano cheese technology. The Pecorino Romano cheese is an industrial cheese imported from cheesemakers from central Italy, and this import of technology led to some changes, some transitions, and the main topics are the elongation of the lactation period that started from autumn up to summer. So we have now 9-10 months of lactation in the dairy sheep farm in Sardinia. And so the introduction of the Christmas lamb that in the past was not considered. So we have 2 lactations now and 2 lambings. The first one is for Christmas lamb in autumn, and the second one is for Easter lamb, we will see, in spring. But the pastoral availability remains the same. So scarce availability in autumn, winter, and high availability on spring. So what's happening? That we suffer a feeding deficit during autumn and winter months. So this led farmers to introduce concentrates and hay during winter and autumn months, just to satisfy the energy requirements of the lactating ewes. So we could talk about 2 pastoralisms in Sardinia. A traditional pastoralism, which is mainly based on a short production of milk, a short production period, with a feeding mainly based on natural pastures, with a very small integration with the concentrates and hay, and manual milking. Artisanal cheese making, shelters in stone walls are nowadays present in Sardinia in the inland and in the mountain areas. So we can see, we can take a look to traditional pastoralism and still now in the inland and in the mountain area of the island, with a multifunctional approach, because there are some byproducts that are produced together with the milk that are vegetables, honey, cork, which is very important in the northern sector of the island, some liquors and something like that. But we have also modern pastoralism, which is mainly located in the plains. We have two plains, Nura on the north and Campidano plain in the southern part of the region. In this case, the farms have a larger amount of animals. The dimension is completely different, and the management is semi-intensive or intensive. It means that feeding is based mainly on grazing on pastures, but also on forage crops, even irrigated, like alfalfa crops, for instance. So very intensive forage management. And also a serious, very huge integration with concentrates and hay. Well, we will see something about this. In many cases, the unifeed is utilized, so an industrial approach with the feeding system. And the milking is mechanical. We have about 5,000 milking parlor, mechanical milking parlor in Sardinia, inside a total of more or less 13,000 farms. Dairy sheep farming systems. So, shed for animals, buildings, modernization of the farms, computerized milking room. These are the main images of a modern dairy sheep farm in Sardinia now, with the utilization of more or less intensive forage crops and more or less industrial or small dairies into the farm. But let's talk about fodder. So the first thing I would like to show you is that in the traditional farming system there is a very large utilization of grazing areas, pastures. In 90% of the utilized agricultural area is characterized by grazing pastures or grazed pastures, while in a more modern farm with high input level, high intensification, only 20% of the surface is composed by natural pastures. So let's take a look also to the concentrate consumption. We pass, the range is from only 1 ton of concentrate per year in the total farm up to more than 200 tons in a more intensive farm. And this led to consequences also in the diet composition. In a traditional farming system, the 50% of the diet is on average composed by the utilization of natural pastures, and the 40% on the grazing on forage crops. Remember that in our conditions the annual forage crops is a double function crops, because it can be grazed in the winter months and lay free of grazing during spring for hay production. But for 3-4 months every year the forage crops can be grazed. Of course, this is not possible for intensive forage crops like alfalfa, for instance, because they are based on cut harvestings. And so in this case, not always, but in many cases, the grazing of alfalfa is not considered. On a modern intensive farm, you can see how lower is the use of natural pastures. Only 5% of the diet is based on the consumption of the herbage from natural pastures, and the 20% is for the consumption of annual forage crops. But the high percentage, the higher one, is for purchased extra feed. So maize silage, concentrates, and in some cases also purchased hay, because in many cases the hay self-produced in the farm is not sufficient to satisfy the feeding and energy requirements of the productive animals. So these are the two extremes, I mean. And this is only a picture describing the complexity of the system. So what is interesting to say is that we have three mainly components now in as a fodder resources in Sardinia, which is the pastures, which are the pastures, the silvopastoral systems, which is raising up in relevance in Sardinia, and we will show you something. I will show you something about this, and the forage crops. We will spend some words about these three components, and specifically about pastures. We have to say that Mediterranean pastures have a very great biodiversity, which is well recognized by scientists all over the world. Scientists from Australia, from US, come in Sardinia to collect seeds to produce cultivars and varieties of forage and pasture species. But this is not only in Sardinia, but in all the Mediterranean basins, because it is a very strong hotspot for biodiversity, no? But specifically, the importance of Mediterranean pastures is linked with legumes, because they play a special role because they improve the quality of the pastures and improve the fertility of the soil because of the fixing of nitrogen from the atmosphere down to the roots. And this is a very important mechanism of enrichment of fertility for the soils. So the presence of legumes is an indicator, an ecological indicator of the welfare of the whole ecosystem. So it's very important for us to find legumes and to try to maintain legumes, to maintain their persistence into the pastures. But which are the main legumes? Of course, subterranean clovers, which is the most important, the princess of the pasture species in the Mediterranean area. Subterranean clovers have good winter growth, high reseeding capability because they are annual species, a prostate habitat that is very, very strictly linked with the feeding behavior of sheep and goat, mainly. And also they have a high persistence thanks to the mechanism of hard-seededness that the species have. The productivity could be very, very high, up to more than 10 tons per hectare of dry matter on annual basis. So as a pasture scientist, our main aim is to improve the richness of legume species in the pasture composition. There are other legumes very important. For instance, on alkaline soil, the medicago species are more important than clovers, and on very acid soils, pH under 5, for instance, in granitic soils, some other legumes could be very, very important as an ecological indicator, like yellow serradella, for instance. But the list is so large, okay, of legumes available in our condition. These are only some examples. Things change in the mountain grassland. In the mountain grassland, up to 800 millimeters above sea level, the annual grass species are substituted by perennial grasses. So very, very well-known grasses like perennial ryegrass or cocksfoot that are so typical of temperate, humid pastures in Central and Northern Europe, for instance, become typical also in the mountain grassland of Sardinia and other region of Mediterranean basin. They have a very great importance for feeding animal at that altitude, at that elevation. So let's come back to the previous picture of landscape, and let's take a look to the presence of trees. This is a very important topic now, not only in Sardinia, but in many Mediterranean regions, because we are coming back to the forest. But these forests are typically grazed. So we can talk about silvopastoral systems. This is a very important topic now, because consider only the carbon sequestration that these ecosystems are able to provide, no? For instance. And this is a very important topic, for instance, at the European level now in the production and the proposal of, for instance, scientific project now. This is a very important keyword at the moment. So it is also important for the further availability and the further resources available in our landscape. So in the last 65, 70 years, the percentage of wooded areas in Sardinia is increased up to more than 50% of the territory. This is a very interesting and important feature. And the result, the outcome, is that Sardinia has turned from an agro-pastoral region like it was in ancient times, since 100 years ago, up to an agro-silvopastoral region. And this shift led to some consequences in terms of management. So we have 1 million of hectares of wooded territory now in Sardinia. And just a brief description of this system is that this is a combination of the coexisting of oak trees. We can be droney oak, cork oak, for instance, with grass understory, which is represented by natural or improved pastoral, or also occasional cereal crops, for instance, in more intensive silvopastoral systems like cork oak, for instance, shrub understory, and livestock. The list of ecosystem services provided by such systems is very large, no? And it is very well recognized by scientific literature. Feeding behavior of the different grazing animals are satisfied, and in general we could say that dairy sheep prefer open oak systems, while cattle prefer more dense systems. But in any case, we are talking about extensive feeding systems with not more than 0.5 livestock unit per hectare. Traditionally, animals stay all year round inside the systems, but this could be a problem because of the maintenance of a good quality and good productivity of pastures, which could be threatened, and also for serious problem of tree regeneration in the silvopastoral system. This is a very typical problem in Iberian dehesas, when cork oak are dramatically threatened by the overgrazing and by the difficulty in having regeneration of young trees in such systems. So the new management techniques are addressed toward multi-species rotational grazing, trying to avoid overgrazing problem and try to satisfy the feeding behaviors, the different feeding behaviors of sheep, goats and cattle. We have an experience now in Sardinia very interesting, where we are combining cattle and goats, and we are observing that cattle prefer legumes while goats prefer grasses. So the combination between the two grazings is extremely interesting for maintaining a high quality of pastures in the silvopastoral systems. And there are some practices to be applied. The utilization on electrical fences in the rangeland, for instance, for maintaining flocks and herds in specific spaces for very quick rotation turns, 1-2 hours per day, only for 3-4 days and not more, and change species coming from goats and cattle every week. I mean, it's a very important point, a very important point also for the changing of filling in the utilization of natural resources by shepherds and herders. This is a very interesting topic. But let's come back to the intensive farm. This is a typical patches distribution in an intensive or semi-intensive Sardinian farm, where the surface is divided in patches because of the need of rotational grazing. So every 2-3 days animals have to turn to maintain the pasture in a top quality level, to avoid the excessive defoliation of the plants. It means that you maintain the protein level at the top level, because the protein are into the leaves and not into the tillers. This is a very important topic for grazing regime management. And you could have more intensive or less intensive management of these forage crops. In a high input management, so in the modern intensive farm, you can use intensive mixtures of oat, barley, red clover, utilizing irrigation and mainly utilizing some agronomic practices at high input, like plowing, like fertilization, like utilization of herbicides and pesticides. But in the last decades, many of intensive farmers, due to the milk price crisis, have decided to turn to shift into another management system, which is not finalized to milk production, but to cheese production, directly produced on farm. It means that a change also in utilization of other resources is happening now. So extensification, in the meaning that they are using native mixture of grasses and legumes. They are not more using plowing or herbicides or pesticides and so on, but only utilizing low input agronomical practices like minimum or no tillage, oversowing of seed mixtures, reduced or no use of fertilizers, disrupting the nitrogen fixed by legumes in the mixture, and trying to obtain a very important result, the persistence of the mixtures for years and years and years without doing nothing. So sowing the mixtures in the first year, giving a little quantity of fertilizer only as a starter, and leave the pasture reproduce itself for years, 4, 5, 6 and more years without doing nothing. So reducing the costs, of course, in the economy of the farm, and obtaining a permanent pasture, which is a very interesting, relevant result also for our scientific activity. So just to conclude, the 2 slides about the relationship between the kind of fodder and the milk, and the quality and quantity of milk. There are some very typical rules. Milk production depends on level of intake, and milk quality depends on the fodder species, on the vegetation stage, the season, and also the stocking rate. If we use more pasture-based crops, so native pasture or improved pastures into the farm, so in sense of extensification of our activity, we could produce milk more rich in fat and fatty acid, vitamins, terpenes, so compounds that are beneficial to human health and to the final quality of the product. So what does it mean? It means that if we use more fresh grass and concentrates and hay, we could obtain a milk that has a very high level of polyunsaturated fatty acid and high level of conjugated linoleic acid percentage, as it means that we produce a very good quality milk. Of course, this kind of milk should be more suitable with mountain grassland farming systems, for instance, where the utilization of natural pasture is natural. But the problem is the market. Who pay for a high quality milk? Nowadays in Sardinia, for instance, nobody. So how you can be pushed to produce a top quality milk if the market do not recognize these features. And finally, just to finish this presentation, milk fat content influences cheese fat content, and we have a direct repercussion on cheese quality. We have made an experiment on this, producing very extensive cheese versus intensive cheese, and we have attempted to have responses from consumer scientists about this, and the response was clear. The consumers recognize the taste, recognize the quality of the cheese, you know, in a totally blind trial in the airport and in the you know, with common people, you know. And this is very important to know. And the final remark is that farmers should select the farming system, the adequate feeding system, to build on the correct and the adequate cheese, and to be in agreement with the trade conditions, with the customers' demand, and finally also to respect an adequate socioeconomic condition on the farm. And that's all, some credits for the photo, and thank you very much for your attention.